On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia, by Gavrilo Princip, a member of a Serbian nationalist organization. This event set off a chain reaction of diplomatic maneuvers and ultimatums among the powers. Austria-Hungary saw the assassination as an opportunity to crush Serbian nationalism, which it believed was a threat to its empire. Backed by Germany's assurance of support, Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding an investigation into the assassination and the suppression of anti-Austrian activities. Serbia's response, while largely accepting the demands, was not deemed satisfactory by Austria-Hungary, which subsequently declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. The alliances quickly came into play. Russia, a protector of Serbia and a member of the Triple Entente, began mobilizing its forces in defense of Serbia. Germany, fearing encirclement, declared war on Russia on August 1, 1914. Germany then turned its sights on Belgium and France, aiming to quickly defeat France and then focus on the Eastern Front against Russia. Germany's invasion of Belgium on August 4, 1914, prompted Britain to enter the war, as Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by a treaty. With Britain's entry, the Great War expanded into a truly global conflict. The early days of the war were marked by rapid movement and massive casualties. However, as both sides dug into trenches along the Western Front, a stalemate emerged. The war of movement devolved into a brutal war of attrition, with soldiers enduring unimaginable hardships in the trenches. Over the years, various battles raged on different fronts, each marked by immense suffering and loss of life. Verdun, the Somme, Gallipoli and Tannenberg are just a few examples of the many battles that scarred the landscape and collective memory. As the war dragged on, societies were strained by the demands of total war. Economies were mobilized for the war effort, and civilians on the home front faced shortages and rationing. Women stepped into roles traditionally held by men, contributing significantly to the war effort. By 1917, the war had taken a toll on both sides. Revolutions erupted in Russia, leading to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and the rise of Bolshevik rule. The United States, previously neutral, entered the war on the side of the Allies, providing much-needed fresh troops and resources. In 1918, the Central Powers began to crumble. Germany's offensives on the Western Front were met with strong resistance, and the combined efforts of the Allies began to turn the tide. The armistice was finally signed on November 11, 1918, effectively ending the fighting. The aftermath of the war was marked by the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed heavy reparations and territorial losses on Germany and its allies. The war's legacy was one of devastation, loss, and political reshaping. It set the stage for future conflicts and shaped the course of the 20th century in ways that continue to reverberate today. Trench warfare emerged as a response to the deadlock that occurred after the initial phase of rapid movement during the early months of the war. As opposing armies faced each other, both sides sought cover and protection from the devastating firepower of modern weapons, which had far outstripped the mobility of troops. Trenches were complex networks of ditches that provided relative safety from enemy fire. They consisted of various types, including frontline trenches, support trenches, and communication trenches. However, life in the trenches was anything but safe or comfortable. Soldiers endured unimaginable hardships in the trenches. Conditions were often appalling, with the trenches becoming muddy and waterlogged due to rain and unsanitary due to the presence of human waste. Trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to wet and cold conditions, was a common affliction. Rats infested the trenches, feeding on corpses and food rations, which exacerbated the spread of disease. Artillery barrages were a constant threat. Both sides bombarded enemy positions with heavy artillery shells, turning the landscape into a moon-like cratered wasteland. The constant shelling led to shell shock, a term used to describe the psychological trauma soldiers experienced as a result of the relentless bombardment. One of the most devastating aspects of trench warfare was the use of toxic gases. Chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas were deployed as chemical weapons, causing agonizing injuries and deaths. Gas masks were developed to protect soldiers from these attacks, but they offered limited protection and added to the discomfort of life in the trenches. The front lines quickly stabilized as both sides entrenched themselves, resulting in a static and bloody conflict along the Western Front. Massive battles such as the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme saw staggering casualties. At Verdun in 1916, the French and German armies clashed in a battle that lasted for months and resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties. The Battle of the Somme, also in 1916, is remembered for its horrifying human cost. On the first day alone, British forces suffered around 60,000 casualties. The battle continued for several months, with little territorial gain and immense suffering. These battles, along with many others, became symbols of the immense human suffering and the high price paid during the war. Trench warfare illustrated the stark contrast between the advancements in technology and the strategies of war, and the inadequacies of those strategies to address the new realities of modern combat. The horrors of trench warfare had a lasting impact on those who experienced it, and left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the war. It serves as a reminder of the grim consequences of conflict and the need for diplomacy, understanding, and efforts to prevent such devastation in the future. The Story of Remembrance. Day. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918 marked the armistice that ended the fighting on the Western Front of World War I. The agreement between the Allies and Germany went into effect, bringing an end to the violence that had ravaged Europe for 4 years. The armistice was met with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and grief. The war had exacted a tremendous toll on soldiers and civilians alike. The years of conflict had left millions dead, wounded, and traumatized. As news of the armistice spread, people poured into the streets to celebrate the long-awaited peace. In the years that followed, nations sought ways to commemorate the sacrifices of those who had served and honor the memory of those who had perished. Poppy flowers, which bloomed in the fields of Flanders and became associated with the war due to the famous poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae, became a symbol of remembrance. The idea of observing a moment of silence to remember the fallen gained traction. King George V of the United Kingdom suggested a 2-minute silence be observed on the anniversary of the armistice. This practice was soon adopted in many countries. In 1919, the first Remembrance Day was observed in the United Kingdom and the British Empire. A moment of silence was observed at 11 a.m. on November 11th. People paused in their daily activities to remember those who had lost their lives in the war. Over time, Remembrance Day evolved into a broader observance, encompassing not only World War I, but also subsequent conflicts and the sacrifices of all service members. It became a day to honor not just soldiers, but also civilians who endured hardships during times of war. Today, Remembrance Day ceremonies are held in various countries around the world. They often include moments of silence, the laying of wreaths at memorials, and the reading of poems and speeches that reflect on the significance of the day. The red poppy remains a common symbol of remembrance, worn as a badge or displayed on wreaths and monuments. Remembrance Day serves as a poignant reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of striving for peace. It's a time for reflection, gratitude, and honoring the sacrifices of those who have served and continue to serve in the defense of freedom and justice.